Welcome to the Dr. Broadway Podcast, the musical theater history podcast where a couple of doctors sit around and talk about Broadway. I'm your co-host, Dr. Kristin Stultz Pressley, joined as always by Dr. Tracey Brent-Chessum. Tracey, we're kind of, in terms of order of events here on the Dr. Broadway Podcast, things have gotten off the rails. So why don't you tell us what we're going to be talking about today, and then I'll talk a little bit about how they've gotten off the rails and how we intend to get them back on.
So today we're talking about Jersey Boys, which premieres in November of 2005. It wins the 2006 Tony Awards, and it's really that musical that kind of kicks off the bio-musical form and brings a lot of respect to the jukebox musical. So here we are.
Here we are.
And how did we get back here? Because we kept telling
question.
people we were moving on to the Tony Award winners. This one is.
That is true. Indeed, it is true. Okay, so here's what happens, dear listener. So as you know, if you're a regular listener to this podcast, you know that our intent was that we would do our seminar series throughout February and some of March, and then we would kick off what we're calling, or what season 3, which is the history of the Tony Awards. So we're going year by year through each year's best musical Tony Award winner, and we're doing deep dives into those, just like we've done from the beginning on this podcast. But as luck would have it, we ended up doing several more seminar episodes than we anticipated doing, which is a wonderful thing. We had some great conversations. I'm not completely convinced that series is over. I think that's going to be a recurring theme for us whenever we get the opportunity to talk to someone who's got something interesting to add to our conversations. We want to take advantage of that. So that seminar series is not just relegated to the 6 or whatever episodes that we did this winter, but we will be getting back to season 3 regular programming. We're just going to kick it down the road a little bit. And the reason for that is because a couple of weeks ago, I got an email from a representative of one of the theaters that shares our podcast with their patrons. And let me take just a second here to say how much we appreciate those theaters that are sharing our content with their patrons. It's an unbelievable resource. You've got an audience member who's coming to see a show. They can listen to the episode about that particular show on their way to the theater, on their way home from the theater, and it's a really great way to educate theatergoers, right? And
we get
love
emails that ask us questions then, and that's lots of fun too.
That's right. We are all for that happening. But in this one particular email from this representative of the theater company, she happened to mention, I've got all of our shows for next season ready to go. I've got your podcast episodes plugged in where there are podcast episodes, but I've noticed there's a handful of shows that you've not yet done an episode on.
That are still touring.
That's right. Yeah. That have hit the road. This is shows like Just in Time. So these shows have hit the road after we started season 2 last year. But we don't want to, that's a big hit show. We don't want to leave that out of our catalog of work. And so we want to take a minute and catch up on those 6, 7, 8 shows that are new to the road so that we can really have that complete set of what's currently touring. Obviously, this is going to be, probably an ongoing situation where we have to pick up shows and plug them in. But we wanted to go ahead and do kind of an addendum to season 2. That'll be 6, 7, 8 episodes. And then we will start, we'll take the summer off as we do as professors. And then we'll start season 3, the Tony Awards, in September. So that has not changed. The topic has not changed. The timing has changed. And I think it's changed for really good reason. I'm so thankful, like I said, for these theaters that are willing to share our content. And we certainly want to accommodate them in any way that we can to be sure that they have all the materials from us that they need. So we're thrilled to be able to do this for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would also mention, if there's another theater out there
If you would like to get in touch with us, yes.
That's right. We're taking requests, apparently. No, but truly, if there's some way that we can be of benefit to your patrons at your theater company, don't hesitate to reach out to us. hello@drbroadway.com. We'll respond very quickly and would love to work together with you. So, having said all of that, we're going to start off with Jersey Boys, which is one of my favorites. I love this show. Tracey, tell me about your experience with it.
That's not a fair question.
Oh no! That sounds like a story. Do tell.
So here's the thing. Jersey Boys is one that I have seen fits and starts. I've not seen it all the way through.
Oh wow, okay.
So even though should I have? Yes. Do I, read all of the critical commentary? Yes. But I haven't seen it all the way through. And part of that is because, and we may have talked about this before, but the theatrical backlash from the playwriting and scholarly community towards Mamma Mia when it comes out in 2001, and then when Jersey Boys comes and wins the Tony, literally a good portion of the academic theatrical world really thought that musical theater was now just dead.
This is the end. Yeah, this is the end.
I am happy to say that I was wrong on that score. I am happy to say that prejudice is a funny thing and you can get over it. But my interaction with Jersey Boys was just like, this is ruining American theater.
Yeah.
What are we doing? Yeah. Why are we not creating our own work now? This is going to be a huge problem. But it just shows you where scholars can be wrong.
Yeah, well, and Tracey, that actually, first of all, obviously you were not alone in that assessment.
I know.
So I hope you do not feel any guilt associated with
she
it.
She did not just ask me that question out loud.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have. I assumed too much there. I loved this show, but I would also say that this show, and we'll talk more about this later on, this show was the jukebox musical that suddenly, if not academics, but at least critics began to get on board with certain jukebox musicals. And this was the show that made that happen. Yeah. So it's kind of a turning point for the genre of jukebox musicals in that regard. And again, like I said, I'll get into that more later.
Because having read the script and everything, it makes a whole lot more sense.
Yeah.
Than Mamma Mia did. But I think everybody was just so about it.
Of course.
So I completely missed it when it went through. However, it's reclaiming itself. I mean, it's coming back for
20th anniversary.
20 years later, it all of a sudden starts coming back around. And I've got quite a few kids that keep getting picked up in it.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
I know I'm going to see it eventually. It's just one of those ones that I haven't really gotten into the pew with at the moment.
Right. Well, before we get into it, there's something that I jumped over that I absolutely do not want to jump over. And that is the fact, Tracey, that you have some professional news to share. And I want to give you the floor and make sure that you have the time to share that very exciting professional news.
Well, so, I think it's shared at the beginning of season 2. We jumped down to Orlando, Florida to help out the University of Central Florida when they lost their theater history professor, and it was a 1-year gig, and we thought we would probably be going back to Washington D.C. after that, but it turns out that they're going to keep me around for a little longer. So
Yay!
I'm converting from a visiting professor to a tenure line professor, and so I'm rapidly working on all of these books and trying to maintain all of my professional standards as I used to, but now I have to actually publish all of this stuff and not just talk about it on podcasts. So, we've really enjoyed our time here in good old Orlando. It's a little too hot for everyone, but
it is.
My kids are doing exceptionally well where they are, and everybody just seems much more settled now. So
that's awesome.
So so it means that we get to kind of continue doing some of these guest spots with my with my baby dramaturgs, which is kind of what I call them. But I am running the dramaturgy program here now, so it is something where we'll be able to, at least with the musicals, because obviously we don't do an entire season of musicals here, but we do about 2 every year.
Okay.
But be able to kind of bring them on the podcast and allow them to talk through.
I love that.
What it is that they're doing. So next year they're doing, Young Frankenstein is one of them.
Okay.
So that one will get on our boards, on our lists, as well as Godspell.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Classic.
So
okay, great.
Those are the 2 that they're doing next year. So I'm excited about it. It's been an interesting process sitting down and kind of going, how do you build a dramaturg? How do you educate a dramaturg, and what do they need to know? And trying to build a program and pitch it to folks. So that rather than it just being like, this is the person who writes the program note, like, how do you build a dramaturgy program where they get all of the different kinds of skills that they may need at some point? So it's been a challenging and fun process, and I'm excited to see it keep going. So
well, congratulations. I think it's a great thing for you, and I know from seeing your girls on Instagram how much they're enjoying being there. I will tell you, Tracey will sometimes, I'll text her midday and she's at work at UCF, and then later for dinner she's at Disney World.
Yeah.
I'm like, how did that happen?
Well, we really thought this was going to be a 1-year thing. So every opportunity to go, we got the Florida, Disney passes.
Yeah, of course.
And every opportunity we went. So it's like, if the kids got out early, we went to Disney.
I love it.
We did it a lot, so much so that their teachers were like, do they need to go this much? And I'm like, no, they don't.
What do you mean need?
None of this is a need.
But Tracey is hard at work, and I think she's mentioned this before, on a book called Disney Musicals. So you can always justify going to Disney because you're writing a book about Disney musicals. So it seems like the perfect place for you to be.
Do that. I should do that next time.
There you go. It's all the reason you need to be there. Well, congratulations again.
Thank you.
That's very well-deserved and very exciting. So I wanted to be sure our listeners were aware of what's happening in your life. And now let's get on with the show. Here we go.
Let's talk
Jersey
about
Boys.
The 4 seasons, shall we?
All right. So, you've probably, if you've come this far with us, you've likely heard our episode about Mamma Mia, which came very early on in the Dr. Broadway podcast in season 1. And Mamma Mia, you cannot talk about Jersey Boys without talking about Mamma Mia. And the reason for that, as I've said so many times, as we have talked about so many jukebox musicals, is that Mamma Mia premieres on Broadway in 2001 after its world premiere in London in 1999. And everything changes. As I have said so many times, it was not the first jukebox musical. However, it was the first to earn billions of dollars, right? And when it did, everyone who had any kind of catalog of music set up and said, wait a minute, I want a slice of that pie, right? And the guys who owned the catalog of Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons were absolutely no different. So Mamma Mia hit some big time on Broadway in 2001. Critics hate it. Academics hate it. I loved it. I don't know what that says about me.
I was being snooty in grad school when this happened, so,
Well, I will tell you, I was snooty and still am to some extent about all the movie adaptations, but I could get right on board with Mamma Mia. It didn't take me any time at all. I love that show. But at any rate, so, in 2001 is when it hits Broadway after a very successful premiere in 99 in London. Then it tours from Toronto all across the country back to New York throughout 2001. And premieres right after September 11th, as we talked about in 2001. And then in 2002 is when conversations begin to be had about what would eventually become Jersey Boys. So there is a direct correlation between the success of Mamma Mia and the development of Jersey Boys. But before we get to that, let me tell you about the Four Seasons, in case you're not familiar with their music. I was, not because I grew up when they were popular, but because I had a mother who grew up when they were popular and played their music a lot in our house. So it was very familiar to me, the music, and that might be one reason why I enjoyed the show so much.
The oldies station.
Yeah.
Like, that's what, in the 80s and 90s, this was on the oldies station.
Right, which we played a lot of in my house. So the Four Seasons were four guys from Newark, New Jersey. They got together. They had their first big hit in 1962. But between the years of 1962 and 1967, they had 13 top 10 hits and 24 top 40 hits. Those included songs like Sherry, Big Girls Don't Cry, Walk Like a Man, Dawn, Go Away, You're No Good for Me, or I'm No Good for You, Bye Bye Baby, Baby Goodbye, and on and on and on. All told, Tracy, they sold more than 100 million records. So this is the kind of catalog, obviously, that it is very reasonable to begin thinking about translating into a jukebox musical. And that's what happens. In 2002, a man named Rick Ellis gets a phone call. Now, Rick Ellis, let me tell you a little bit about him. At the time, in 2002, he was working for Serino Coyne, which is a Broadway-focused marketing agency. But Ellis was a graduate of the Yale School of Drama. He was a charter member of the American Repertory Theater, and he really wanted to make that jump from marketing for theater to creating for theater. Yeah, he wasn't sure.
But he started as a creator, didn't he?
Yes, he
started
did.
As somebody who is
That's
a practitioner who then went and said, I know so much about this. I'm a really good marketer, so why don't I move into that?
Yeah. Or,
And now he's going back in the other direction. That happens a lot in our business. I don't know.
Exactly. Well, and I think a part of it, and I don't know all of Ellis's biography, but it could be. I know in a lot of cases like this, you take the marketing job because it's more stable and you need the stability for whatever, benefits, salary, whatever. Yeah, whatever that might be. And so you take those skills that you have and you apply it in a different way. So that's exactly what he was doing, but he was really chomping at the bit to get back to making theater. And he didn't know yet what the project would be, but he knew that he wanted to work with a man named Marshall Brickman. Marshall Brickman and Rick Ellis were poker buddies, and Brickman, he's plain and simply.
I met him playing poker, so we should write a musical together.
That's right.
And you wonder why we thought this was all implausible.
That's right. But it makes sense when you know about Brickman.
Oh, yeah.
Marshall Brickman was a filmmaker who'd written multiple screenplays with Woody Allen, including the best of them, Annie Hall, Manhattan, one of my favorites, Manhattan Murder Mystery. So he was very accomplished. He'd won an Academy Award for his screenwriting, right? With Woody Allen. And so the two of them knew that they wanted to do something together. They had no idea what it was going to be. So at this day in 2002, Rick Ellis gets a call from the person who owns the rights to the Four Seasons catalog and says, hey, you know what's happening over there at Mamma Mia at the Winter Garden Theater? Can we stir something like that up for the Four Seasons? And Ellis didn't really think anything of it, except that he agreed to take the meeting. And so Ellis invites his buddy Brickman and Rick Ellis and Marshall Brickman and Frankie Valli, who was the lead singer of the Four Seasons, and Bob Gaudio, who wrote most of the music for the Four Seasons, meet for lunch at Sardi's one day. I mean, this is quintessential.
We've talked about Bob Gaudio before. We talked about him in relationship to...
Was it the Neil Diamond?
It was
Beautiful
the Neil
Noise.
Diamond. Yeah. musical, and he's the one that Neil Diamond sat down with and was like, should I do this? Should I not do this?
Yes.
What should I do here? So
yeah,
I was like,
that's right.
We've heard that name before.
That's right. Thank you for pointing that out, because I'd forgotten about that. But you're absolutely right. Bob Gaudio was the one who, I believe in 2020, took a lot of those Neil Diamond songs and reorchestrated them and tried to imagine what would it sound like if we set it in the context of a Broadway musical.
Yeah.
And there we go. You're absolutely right. So at any rate, the four of these men sit down and they have lunch, and they're talking through, what could we do? Yes, they're having lunch at Sardi's, and they're talking through what kind of story could we tell. And now when they started, they were going to use the Four Seasons catalog of music to tell a made up story, very much like Mamma Mia did, right? Just totally fictional, fantastical kind of story. What can we do with this, music to make it stick? And none of that interested Ellison Brickman at all. But interspersed with these ideas that all the men were throwing out were conversations with Valley and Gaudio about the experiences they had while part of the Four Seasons. And if you're familiar with the show, then you know what I'm talking about. There were mafia connections, there were gambling debts, there were men thrown through windows. There was one night when they came off stage in Columbus, Ohio, and were immediately thrown into a paddy wagon and taken to jail. So there were all kinds of
it just feels like this scene should have been should be on film, should be in a film somewhere from The Godfather. It's kind of like,
exactly.
Let me just tell you what we went through.
Well, and that's what Ellison Brickman were thinking. They're sitting there and we're like, oh my gosh, forget the, three men come to Greece to find out if they're the father of this girl who's about to get married.
Yeah.
Let's tell the story that you're telling us right now. That's the story. This should be something. Let us write this.
And
if you're brave enough to do it.
No. Why? Please do not tell people what we got up to on tour. Well, and for all of you out there that have toured before, we all know that tour is best. We don't talk about tour.
What happens on tour stays on tour, right? Right, exactly. Well, believe it or not, both Gaudio and Valley were like, I don't hate that idea. Let's see what happens. And so Ellis and Brickman get together and they start working on a treatment. And within a couple of months, they have enough of a treatment that they can pitch it to producers. At this point, they were really thinking more of a play, probably because it was more dramatic, and probably because Ellis and Brickman didn't come necessarily from a musical theater background, right? They came from a more dramatic background. And so they weren't thinking necessarily a musical. They were approaching it as a play because that was their expertise. So they, go to these different producers. We've got this idea. We've got this treatment. Here's what we're going to do. We've got, the Four Seasons on board. Well, Ellis and Brickman could have been the best of friends, but guess what they didn't have as Broadway writers? A track record of working together, right? I'm sure that there was some gravitas to...
Or working on Broadway, really, for that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm sure that there was some gravitas to the fact that Brickman had an Academy Award for working with Woody Allen. But as we know, writing for film and writing for stage are very, very different. And so it just didn't go real well. And so what they decided to do was to stop talking about the story of the Four Seasons, and they started talking about data. And I think this is instructive.
Yeah.
I think this is an instructive moment, both for producers as well as for people who are pitching ideas to producers. They switched up their pitch. Instead of focusing on the story, they focused on the ticket buyer. And what they said was, in 2003, which is when these talks were happening, the people who bought Four Seasons records were old enough to be in the largest part of the theater-going public. In other words, they were implying these people are buying theater tickets. Give them something that's familiar and they will come to see it, right?
That's why we're getting all the Gen X stuff right now.
Bingo. Bingo. Yes, indeed. And that really played with a man named Michael David, who worked with and was a co-founder of a group called Dodger Theatricals.
Yeah.
So let me tell you about Dodger Theatricals for those who may not be familiar with it. It was formed in 1978 when a group of 6 friends, including a name you'll probably be familiar with, Rocco Landisman, who's now part owner of Jew Jamson Theaters, and Des McAnuff, who is another name that we'll talk more about in a little bit, but is a name that has worked extensively on Broadway and around Broadway. Well, they started producing in the late 70s in Brooklyn. They then started working with Joseph Papp in the New York Shakespeare Festival. And then in 1982, they have their first hit on Broadway with the Tony-nominated Pump Boys and Dinettes. From there, they have a string of hits. Let me just go through these. Big River, Tony Award winner. Secret Garden. Guys and Dolls, the 92 revival that starred Nathan Lane and Faith Prince. The Who's Tommy. How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying, the 95 revival that starred Matthew Broderick and Megan Mullally. Yeah. You're in Town in 2001. Well, 2001 is that should send off bells in everybody's heads because things changed a lot in 2001. And after 2001, between 2001 and 2003, they were kind of hungry for a hit, the Dodgers were. And so when Ellison Brickman talked to Michael David, who was, again, the head of Dodger Theatricals at the time, he was interested and he asked them, who are you thinking of for a director? Well, initially they had 2 folks in mind. One was Tommy Tune, very famous actor, director, choreographer, many time Tony Award winner, known for shows like My One and Only and The Will Rogers Follies, also known for being an incredibly tall Texan who can sing, dance, and act.
Yes.
But they were also very interested in Susan Stroman. Of course, Susan Stroman was the talk of the town. We've talked about that. She had produced or directed. She'd started as a dancer herself, and then a choreographer, and then a director with 2000's Contact, the dance musical, and then more recently with the producers in 2001.
And she's really early in her career there. So, like, her coming, like, it shouldn't surprise us. They were like, Tommy Tune, and maybe then Susan Stroman.
Right.
She's new and upcoming, but that's how she's seen at that moment. Yeah.
Yeah, she had really was beginning to explode and became, the hot a hot commodity around at that same time period. So Michael David hears their wish list and he says, I want you to know I know the perfect person to direct this piece. And he recommends fellow Dodger, who had co-founded the Dodger Theatricals with him, Des McAnuff. And the reasons he gave was because Des McAnuff had played in a rock band as a teenager. The first album he'd bought himself was won by the Four Seasons. He'd won Tony Awards for his direction of Big River and The Who's Tommy. And really at this point, it's hard to argue. He certainly had the resume to pull it off. Who's Tommy? That's taking a rock catalog of music and turning it into a new musical.
Then you kind of think about, like, if they haven't really even started writing this yet, have they? And
they have a treatment at this point.
They have like a treatment, but it's not actually written. And they're thinking they're going after dance directors. So they think it's going to be more movement, like
that's a great point. Yeah.
And so then when he's like, no, switch it about the music, make it about the music, because Who's Tommy is all about the music, isn't it? The story is weird and goofy and like you have to be on drugs to understand it. And then there's movement in it, but it's not tons.
A dance musical, like
it's not
Contact.
Exactly.
Yes.
So
that's a great point.
He has done makes him really, really able to direct a kind of like a rock musical, not necessarily a dance musical. So they're having to then shift. And this is where we kind of get into producers who really do make, just by shifting somebody's perspective towards a different director can completely change what a show ends up being about. Yeah. I think that's really, it's a cool thing that they're able to do. So
yeah, and that's such a good point that I hadn't thought of. And also, when we talk more about Des McAnuff, we're going to see how essential he was to the story that they ultimately told, because it would have looked very different. Ellis and Brickman had a germ of an idea, but they really didn't know where to go with it and what to do with it. And it was Des McAnuff, recommended by Michael David, who said, let's go this way. And it changed everything and is likely a major key to the success of the show. So Des McAnuff, like I said, had won Tony Awards for Big River and The Who's Tommy. And at that moment in time, 2003, he was in his second stint as the artistic director at La Jolla Playhouse. Now, La Jolla Playhouse, Tracy, I'm sure you know well as someone who grew up in Southern California. But for those who don't, it's just outside of San Diego in one of the most beautiful little towns I have ever seen. It was founded in 1947 by actor Gregory Peck and Mel Ferrar and Dorothy McGuire, other actors. And the thinking was those three wanted a place where they could have their theater fix while they were in LA making movies. Yeah. And so they would come down and they might make $10,000 a week to make a movie for MGM, and then they'd come down and make $50 a week to do a play at La Jolla Playhouse, but they loved that stage.
But I got my fix.
Exactly. And so that's why they built it. And, it certainly has had its highs and lows in the decades since then. But McAnuff really helped in his first stint in the early 1980s, helped to bring it to national prominence. And it remains there today. So McAnuff comes in the early 80s, like I said. They export both Big River and Tommy to Broadway. The La Jolla Playhouse wins a Regional Theater Tony Award under McAnuff's direction. And then in 2000, McAnuff leaves to direct film. So I'm assuming, I don't know, I should have looked into this more directly, but I did not, that he did not have a whole lot of success with film, or maybe decided he didn't like it, or for whatever reason. He's back at La Jolla, and in 2003, he meets with Ellis Brickman and Michael David about directing Jersey Boys. And he heard what Ellis and Brickman had planned to do with the show. And he was immediately like, I am completely uninterested. This sounds like nothing I would ever want to do. He said he didn't want to see Frankie Valli breaking into song while trying to pick up a girl singing Candy Girl at a diner,
That is, that would have ruined it completely.
Yes, exactly.
Because of the nature of their voices and the music that they created with the falsetto and everything.
That's right.
It just ends up being way too cute by half. And it would just, no one would sit through that. So has got the right instinct there.
And the authenticity. When you know their real story, that's a joke. It's like the movie that was made about Lorenz Hart right after he died in the late 40s, right? Where he has a wife and, this is so inauthentic.
This isn't even helpful to him.
Make it go away, right?
Yeah, stop it.
Yeah, exactly. And so Des McAnuff saw their treatment and immediately was like, this is not it. No. And he said, I don't want anything to do with it. But he did say, I have an idea. If you want to do it this way, then we'll give it a shot. He said, you've got to tell the real story of the band, meaning you've got to be brave enough to go on stage in a piece of musical theater and talk about gambling debts, and not just, in a cartoonish way, like Guys and Dolls, like in a, you're going to wake up with the fishes kind of way, right?
The only way their music works on a musical theater stage is if it is contrasted with, the dark.
Yes, brilliant point.
And, you've got to have the dark and the CD I think you used in your book chapter. Yep. You need that weight. You have to have that dynamic contrast, or otherwise it's out of weight with one another.
That's a great point. And Des McAnuff, like I said,
totally right.
Yes, his instinct was spot on, and you're so right that those other directors who are amazing may not have had the same instinct for this particular piece. In which case, it never would have worked. Yeah, and so it really ends up being a key moment Well, Ellis and Brickman say, hey, listen, we need a producer and we need a director. And if that's what you say to do, that's what we'll do. But it really ended up being the vision that they needed to run with the piece. And so they get to work. They start putting together not just a treatment this time, but a script. And they access, they interview their three of the four seasons were still alive at this point. So they interviewed Bob Gaudio and Frankie Valli, of course, and then a third member named Tommy DeVito. Nick Massey, who was the fourth of the 4 seasons, had died in 2000, but they talked to the other 3. They also had access to DeVito's unpublished autobiography, which they described as beyond description.
Yeah. It's like, no one can publish this. This is how crazy these 4.
Yeah, exactly. Oh. Exactly. And what Ellis and Brickman kept coming back to as they interviewed these men was essential. They realized how the 4 men, well, the 3 that they talked to, had lived essentially the same, experience, but they each saw it so drastically differently. And it was then again McAnuff who comes up with this idea of, well, why don't we have 4 narrators? There's 4 seasons. Why don't we have 4 narrators and let each of them take a turn telling the story from their perspective?
Yeah.
And so that was where it all clicked. And Ellis and Brickman get to work. They approached it very much as writing a play rather than a musical. Like I said, their experience would, set them up for more of a dramatic interpretation than a musical interpretation. And they, in no time at all, had come up not with a complete script, but with enough of one that when McAnuff read it, he was so sure that there was something there that he gave it a late summer spot in La Jolla's 2004 season.
Oh, awesome.
Isn't that crazy? Mm-hmm. So, the creative team at La Jolla was making costumes and building sets, having no idea what the final script would be like. But they had an opening date that they had to be ready for. So, there was the pressure was on, right, to get it ready. Of course, they do get it ready. I go into a lot more detail about this in my book, Jukebox Musicals. Some real interesting information about the casting of this show that if you followed it when the show first came out, you'll be interested to read. But I'm going to skip all of that here in the interest of time and just say it opened in 2004, October of 2004, as scheduled at La Jolla. And not surprisingly, the reviews were pretty tepid. One reviewer said it was just a bunch of stock anecdotes from any number of biopics. But as is so often the case, especially with
that
Jukebox
was me.
Musicals,
I wrote that. I'm just kidding.
Fair enough. Audiences, for whatever the reviewers thought, audiences loved it. They loved it. The show was extended multiple times. It ended up running for 15 weeks. And they actually ended up, I love this, they kept the box office open during intermission because audience members were so excited that they wanted to give them the chance to buy tickets to future shows at intermission. So that tells you how enthusiastic. No,
because no one's coming to buy tickets.
That's right.
That doesn't happen.
That's right.
Very often,
That's right.
At least, apparently.
That's right. So the show is extended, like I said, at La Jolla into January of 2005. Now, at this point, Broadway was expected, but far from a foregone conclusion. And one of the reasons for that was they didn't have a venue. So Ellis and Brickman, again, like they had pounded the pavement trying to find a producer, pounded the pavement trying to find a venue in New York. And Michael David of Dodger Theatricals once again steps in to save the day. It was mutually beneficial. The Dodgers needed a hit. In fact, in March of 2005, the New York Times had published an article essentially eulogizing the Dodgers and saying, oh, they're dead. They'll never do anything else. But David wasn't ready to give up. And so he called up his buddy and fellow Dodger founder, Rocco Landisman. Landisman, of course, I mentioned him earlier. He left the Dodgers in 1987 to become the president of Drew Jameson. And in February of 2005, just after Jersey Boy closes in La Jolla in January of 2005, Landisman became the outright owner of all 5 Drew Jameson theaters.
It's like,
so,
wow.
Yeah.
1-800 call a favor.
Yeah, David, in fact, calls in a favor, and he tells Landisman, listen, I promise me you're going to thank me for this. And so in May of 2005, the deal was inked. Jersey Boys would play the Virginia Theater, which was renamed the August Wilson, just after it opened. And the show opened on November 6th, 2005. Critics were almost euphoric. It is startling, the shift in attitude.
This is what we remember. And I'm like, it's dead. We're all dead. I just remember like reading this and just being like, well, the thing that I love is over. So.
Right. I know.
Oh my goodness.
I know. One of the most euphoric was Chris Jones. Chris Jones, when I've written in the books of the Essential series, I tend to quote Chris Jones a lot. He and I see eye to eye on a lot of things. But he wrote in the Chicago Tribune that Jersey Boys was the slickest and most exciting musical package Broadway had seen in months or maybe years. This is a jukebox musical.
Yeah.
And Howard Cosell in the Daily News gave probably a really perfect assessment of the difference between how journalists felt about Mamma Mia and how they now, 4 years later, were so accepting of Jersey Boys. He wrote, maybe I should start by listing all the jukebox musicals I've panned, starting with the dreadful pace setter Mamma Mia, just so you don't think I'm a pushover. But there's no point in beating around the bush. I had a great time at Jersey Boys.
But you can see in that.
Oh, yeah.
Right? It's like, look, I'm not being a pushover. I don't, like, all these people are criticizing me, but I had fun.
Exactly. I got to be honest.
It's like, look, all of these people are going to hang me, tar and feather me.
Oh,
because I'm saying I like this. And I know why.
Yep.
But
he was in good company because most of the reviewers felt very much the same way. This was such a turning point for a couple of things. One was critics began to accept the jukebox musical. They, that certainly doesn't mean that they love them all. It doesn't mean that a lot of them aren't still panned, but it does mean that they began to think. 20 years
later, I, who was just thought that it was the worst thing ever.
Yeah.
That was happening. Literally, like, it can be done well.
Yes. And this one was done.
And this is a part of our form, and we need to learn how to do it well. And
that's right.
This is part of that.
So not only does Jersey Boys kind of give a little bit of sophistication, I don't know the right word, but it begins, it is a musical that heralds the jukebox musical can be celebrated by critics and academics, but it was also one of the first biomusicals that kind of kicks off the subgenre of jukebox musicals that are dominant today, which is the biomusical. So after Jersey Boys, we get Beautiful, the Carole King musical, and we get On Your Feet, the story of Emilio and Gloria Estefan, and we get Tina, the Tina Turner musical. So on and on and on, we can see the impact of this show. And another thing that Chris Jones wrote in the Chicago Tribune that I think is really instructive, especially given that we talk so much about jukebox musicals, but he came up with a recipe for good jukebox musicals, and I think there's a lot to what he says.
Yeah, and you've given some of these before.
Oh, have I? Oh, see, I don't remember what I've said and what I haven't.
No, they need to be repeated, but it's like, just look at how early this is happening, but this is something that is shared with Mamma Mia, and like, why do people latch on to these? There's 3 good reasons.
Yep. One is a decent book. We can thank Des McAnuff for that. That was his idea, because if it had been left to Ellison Brickman, it probably would have been washed away like Ring of Fire, the Johnny Cash musical, and all those others that just didn't make it. Yeah. So it had a decent book. Number 2, it integrated the songs properly. Instead of Frankie Valli singing Candy Girl to a girl he's trying to pick up, these songs were them performing on the Ed Sullivan Show. That's when that came in. Or Frankie performing for the mob boss that he's trying to, make up for debts with, and things like that. And number 3, and this is huge, don't mess with the arrangements. Chris Jones wrote, nobody wants to hear some soprano come out and sing a postmodern Bye Bye Baby.
No.
Hear the songs. They want to hear the songs sound like they do on the recordings.
Yep.
And when you think back,
and we've seen that on all of these ones
yes.
that we've done, and you've said it every time. It has to sound like it does on the album.
Yeah.
If it doesn't, we've never done one that we've been able to say, oh, this doesn't sound like it does on the album.
It's all new.
And,
it's all new.
No.
The exception is Hell's Kitchen, where there are some new orchestrations of Alicia Keys' music, but that is an exception.
But she did it.
Right. Exactly.
And she, that is an exception. It is. Yeah. It is also an asterisk.
Yes. Yes. Yep.
Exception
for sure.
Too.
Yep. For sure.
Yeah.
So opens in November of 2005. Like Tracy's already alluded to, it wins the Tony Award for Best Musical. It actually has 8 nominations overall and ends up winning 4: Best Actor, Best Featured Actor, and Best Musical being the most notable. It recouped its $8 million investment in less than a year. And of course, I did the math. That would be $13 million a day today.
Yeah.
You could not come close to producing that for $13 million today, but that would be the adjusted for inflation number. So here you have it. 20 years later, this show is continuing to excite. I just did a season reveal for the Tennessee Theater in Knoxville, Tennessee. Jersey Boys is coming there, and that crowd roared for a show they've probably all seen several times. It is a hit. It is pure pleasure, much like Mamma Mia. And so now you know the rest of the story.
Yeah.
What do you think, Tracy?
I think that sounds pretty good.
Yeah, it's a good show. I like it.
I should really go see it all the way
You should
through.
Go see it. I can't recommend it highly enough.
I've seen little bits of it and everything, so you get a sense, but you're right. I'm gonna
it's time, Tracy.
I'm going to have to drive all the way to Tennessee and get over
That's
myself
right.
and just
20
be like,
years later, it ain't going anywhere.
You were wrong, and you will sit through it.
That's exactly right. Exactly right.
Awesome.
Well, that'll do it for this episode of the Dr. Broadway podcast. Tune in next time for our an episode where we'll be discussing Beetlejuice. And until then, you can connect with us via email at hello@drbroadway.com or on Instagram, YouTube, or TikTok at Dr. Bway Podcast.